These are the ad-libs. Quincy and I first met, it's almost 50 years ago, which doesn't seem quite that long.
Yeah, I was 12.
It's pretty close, actually.
13.
Quincy at that time in New York was already a significant figure in the jazz scene as an arranger, composer, leader of recordings, bands, and a trumpet player. And when he was 23 in 1956, he was the man that was chosen to put together the big band that Dizzy Gillespie took to Latin America. And by the way, there are 3 now CDs of that band. It's called Dizzy in Latin America, the 1986 State Department tour. It's put out by Red Anchor Records, and it's something that everybody who cares about big bands ought to get. Anyway, here you are, all these years later, internationally renowned, and on the cover of Jazz Times this month, they call you the most powerful man in pop.
Oh my God.
How do you categorize yourself?
One step ahead of the posse. Oh, just working my way through life.
Yeah, riding the lightning, I think you once said.
That's right.
It's interesting because I found an interview I did with Quincy in Downbeat in 1954, and he was consistent then as he is now. He said, certainly a cat's not going to lose anything by having 3 or 4 conceptions. If a man, you'd have to say if a man or woman, if a man can feel more than one style, he's a better musician. If a musician can project in a modern vein, he should be able to project in Dixieland too. So it's not unusual.
I said that?
Yeah, you said that. Because it reminded me of the fact that I once interviewed Lester Young, who was then one of the hippest people in the history of the music and still is with music. And as I was leaving, at the time, Dixieland was considered only for squares. And Lester said to me, do you like Dixieland? I said, yeah, if it's good. He said, me too. One of the things that's missing now in the jazz scene, something that you've had a lot to do with, is bands, the big bands. They were the training grounds for a lot of musicians. In fact, practically every important musician for over many years, including the territory bands, the local bands or regional bands that few people heard of them. Now, all we have are mostly ghost bands. These are orchestras named for dead leaders, fronted by somebody else. So this is a softball question. How serious a loss is the absence of big bands?
I think it's a huge loss. It's the only spawning ground that I really had my roots tied to. I think the tradition of a big band from the very beginning, I must have been 12 or 13 years old when I heard it, and it saved us from being gangsters, it really did, because we went from Chicago, the biggest ghetto in America, and left there in 1943 when I was 10 years old, and went to Bremerton, Washington, where there were about 3 black people there. Yeah. And they had a section way out of town, 3 miles up a hill called Sinclair Heights, where we all lived. And they made sure that nobody wanted to stay after the war, so nobody could have phones in the little sheds. And they put a telephone booth in every corner. And in searching for an identity, Nat, and it's hard for somebody very young to understand what it felt like then, because we've got satellites and MTV and BET and all that stuff. Then you're just talking about the Green Hornet, Gabriel Heater, Dagwood and Blondie, Rochester, and Beulah, and Amos and Andy, and they were white, so you have to try to imagine how difficult it is, especially, my mother was in the mental hospital since we were about 8 years old, so trying to find and grab a hold of some validation, or identification, or nurturing, or whatever you call it. The word nurturing didn't go around too much in those days. Depression, that word. Or dieting didn't come up too much. That was starving. So in that search, even in schools, in the schools in the Northwest, and at that time, I think the academic standard was probably, along with Massachusetts, Washington was the highest in America, but
Yeah.
it was not designed for African American people at all that time. It was C, Spot, Ron, and Jane. So we were trying to find somebody to be like.
Yeah.
There were no corners, no pool halls or anything yet, because we were the first family out there. So lightning first struck when we just stayed in trouble all day. We were stealing in stores and shooting down pine trees or whatever trouble we could get into. We had a full day every day. Steal a whole case of honey, and spend the rest of the day just drinking quarts of honey all day long. I didn't drink honey again for 25 years. So we had our own recreation program. And one day we broke into a place called the Armory. It was called the Recreation Room. And we heard they had some lemon meringue pie, and ice cream in there. So that was a nice new conquest and territory to hit. We busted in there about midnight and ate all the pie and ice cream we could handle. And then we had some pie fights for a while when we got full. And then individually we roamed around the center, and I broke into an administration room, I later found out. And there was, in the shadows, there was a piano over in the corner. And I almost closed the door, and something says, "Don't be stupid." Something deep inside. It was so strange. And I went back into the room and just walked over to the piano and let the fingers feel it around. I had hit pianos before, but it never meant anything to me.
Yeah.
Just playing around. And from that moment on, that changed my life. That turned me upside down. And I felt all the goosebumps, and I said, not only is this another life choice for me, but it's a substitute for a mother.
Yeah.
And that's a real big decision. So the next good thing that happened, I'm just talking about the role that fate can play in your life. Now, this is a long answer to that, but
Go ahead, it's interesting.
Then the big bands started to come through there. And I said Charlie Barnett with Clark Terry. We'd see Maynard Ferguson, the Stan Kitten Band with Ernie Royal, Woody Herman, Basie, Duke, and Lunsford, and Louis Armstrong, and Erskine Hawkins. And I want to tell you, Dizzy Gillespie's band, I want to tell you, when I heard that, man, there were 18 incredible human beings there playing the same thing. We were looking at stock, later on played stock arrangements, which were printed up. These were written in ink.
Yeah.
All the corners around the music were frayed because they'd been on one-nighters. That meant they'd been doing a lot of partying, seeing a lot of ladies, and having a good time playing a lot of music. And it seemed just like it had almost everything that you could ever want: a sense of pride and dignity and talent, a sense of humor and intelligence, and a place. And it was unified. And so it had a real strong impact on me as a human being. I mean, as a place, this is where I want to live forever.
Yeah.
And you talk about the importance of big bands. We used to sneak in the dances too. We didn't have any money, so 3 or 4 of us would try to look older, and we had cigarettes we didn't even smoke. Trying to pretend we were in the band, some big raggedy overcoats so we'd look older. And we'd just walk by with a cigarette in the mouth and say, "In the band," so with the backstage, so the guy would look at us a little funny. It's because we looked a little young. And we didn't have problems when it was with Dizzy or Basie or Duke, but a couple of times we went in there and said, "In the band," he said, "Oh, no, you're not, it's Les Brown." Forget it, or Skinny Ennis or somebody.
Yeah.
Because we listened to Gil Evans' arrangements with Skinny Ennis and Claude Thornhill. Anyway, that's the big bands. You talk about big bands, man. Last night I was in front of one with Clark Terry and some of the old guys in the band. And that thrill, the same thrill I felt at 15, after you stay up all night and write an arrangement and bring your hand down and hear that sound, that will never, ever do anything but give me goosebumps.
Yeah, for this listener, it's the same thing. I can't think of a sound more exhilarating than a big band really grooving. It's like a train going through the night.
That's right.
Now, the big bands, as I said, used to nurture young musicians. So did jam sessions after hours, and they've almost disappeared.
That's right.
But what you have now, a lot of high schools, colleges have clinics. They have jazz orchestras. One of the most well-known one is the North Texas State College. I've been down there. They have A band, C band, D band, all kinds of bands. And Benny Carter came down there a couple of years after I did. And Benny doesn't like to badmouth anybody. And he said, you know, those young black players, they can read anything. There's only one thing wrong. I can't tell one from the other. Where does a musician get the maturation these days? Where does he learn?
The individuality?
Yeah.
Well, it's, I remember when studying with Nadia Boulanger, she used to say a person's music can never be more or less than they are as a human being. And we mentioned big bands. We seem to forget, because they become such huge, they left such big imprints in history, like Duke and Basie. But they started out, Artie Shaw, all of them, they were dance bands. They were just to make you shake your booty. I'm sorry, that's what it was about. And despite of this its commercial aspect, innovation and this genius quality crawled through these bands. You know, Charlie Parker came out of Jay McShann, Dizzy out of Cab's band, and they all migrated over to Earl Hines, and then they all, a mass exodus from there to Billy Eckstine's band, which was everybody, Miles, Dizzy, JJ, Cecil Payne, Bird, Dexter Gordon, Gene Ammons. I mean, that was the band.
Yeah.
That's the one I used
Which
to
hardly ever recorded, unfortunately.
Right. And it was, that's the band I used to listen to all day, the records all day. Then I never saw them in person, but I saw Dizzy's band. And that was a disease. It was like an obsessive, contagious disease. I could not get enough. And I'd sit up all night trying to write music for big bands, didn't know key signatures or anything. I'd put down on the trumpet part. I was writing a suite. All the trumpet players play your B note. Play your B natural a half step lower. It sounds funny if you play it straight. Except it's a flat, idiot, on the third line, you know. That takes care of all of that with key signatures. And I don't know, it was just like being in a wonderland.
There's another thing missing with the big bands, and that's the relationship between the listener dancing and the band. Ellington once said to me, when Johnny Hodges was playing a ballad at a dance, and he heard somebody sigh on the dance floor, he said the sigh came back to us and became part of the music. It's not quite the same thing at a concert hall.
That's beautiful.
Now, you had a lot of mentors, and I guess one of the key ones was Count Basie, whom you got to know when you were quite young. What did he teach you?
Well, he outside of all the musical things, he taught me, he helped me to become a human being, and how to be a real decent human being over a long period of time. But economy, originality, groove master. And I remember later years when I went to New York, and I used to worry Basie to death, and Clark Terry gave me trumpet lessons during that period in Seattle. We kid about it to this day because I used to wake him up at 6 in the morning. And later on, we used to all stand around in Birdland just before Basie would open. You remember what a ritual that was, Basie's band at Birdland. Yeah. I mean, that was cars, miles around, all of the foxy ladies and everything. But Monday was that was the off night. That was the jam session night. And in the daytime, that's when Basie would rehearse and try out the new arrangers. So you'd see a line of arrangers like Ernie Wilkins, Neil Hefti, Frank Foster, Thad Jones, Johnny Mandel, all of us standing around begging, you know, to just praying that he would get a chance to play one of our arrangements. So Neil was like top of the list because he was well known at that time.
Neil Hefti.
Neil Hefti, yeah. And he came in one day and he chewed gum. You know, Neil had a lot of energy. So he'd kick it off. They said, No. He said, let's try it. I want to hear more of those harmonies. Just let's hear it about right here. I mean, you could shave between the beats of
right.
The tempo. But it taught me, I couldn't believe it was like a total brand new composition just with the tempo.
Sure.
I never ever forgot that. They had a tune they called, Freddie Green wrote, called In the Pocket. And finding the pocket from there on in was another thing on the list that Basie taught me. But find just the right pocket. And that's why many times he'd go for 8 bars, with those those little Chinese shoes he had on. What do you call those? The tuck shoes.
There was another thing about Basie. He hated, as I understand it, to have a mic on his piano when he recorded.
Right.
And he used to say to the guys in the band, Freddie Green was the rhythm guitarist. Freddie used to say he's in charge of the rhythm wave. And Basie used to say to the guys in the band, if you can't hear Freddie Green, you're too loud.
That's right.
And this whole thing about tempo and dynamics and not so much electronics as you have these days.
There were no electronics at all.
Yeah.
Everything was acoustic because, 20 years later, if the electricity went off, it was just tacit.
Yeah.
You could hear nothing, but everything was acoustic. That band, and I can't think of any band that had more dynamics than Basie's band too. Because they used to come down to, and that you remember those moments when their tempos way up here like that, and they're down at 3 P's, pianissimo, double pianissimo, and then raise it up and just roar and blow everybody out of Birdland. Awesome. And that's the same feeling I got when I was a kid and get now.
There was another thing about what Basie taught you. When you had a band, you had a date in Hartford, and the promoter expected 1,800 people, and 700 showed up. And Basie said what to you about?
Well, he gave us he got the gig for us. You're right.
Yeah.
And he said he couldn't do it, so he turned it over to us, and we got a certain amount for it. And we were coming up from New York, and it was for, I remember, the Black Shriners, and the capacity about 1,700 people, and about, like Nat said, about 800 showed up. I was upset about that, not only about that, but because there was also a trio there. There was an organ trio like Wild Bill Davis with an organ and a guitar and a drummer that just blew us off the dance floor. We couldn't get any people on the dance floor. We were playing too much bebop. And this band got on and kept everybody on the floor. And at the end of the gig, we got paid, and all of a sudden, here's Basie. And he said, give the man half of his money back. I said, what? You got to be kidding, man. We were starving to death. I said, give him half of his money back. He put your name down front. Nobody showed up. It's not his fault. He might be the one that has to book you next year. And he gave me hundreds of lessons like that.
Yeah.
You take me to the bank and guarantee loans and just how to be a human being, outside of everything else, tempos and grooves and fun and low life and everything.
And what comes out in his music. You can tell that much about a person by what the music is.
Yes, you hear it.
That's what Bird used to say. Whatever you've lived comes out in your music.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's when you said about what Benny Carter said, why the individuality comes through. There was no question about it. Ben Webster, man, his tenor was just like Ben's as a human being.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one that taught me when I was really young, how to really handle some Black Label from a real professional, from Kansas City. And he said, here's how you do it, Junior. First, let's go eat. And we would have smothered pork chops, greasy smothered pork chops, so you get a nice coating of grease down there, a foundation, This is about 7:30, Get that foundation going, and some greens, and some sweet potato pie and everything else. And then he would start with that emotion lotion, the Do It fluid, of the Black Label. And we'd hang with the Ignorall all night. I could never keep up with Ben because he could go through 2 quarts. And, and young guys always think they can do that, you can keep up with these guys, but they've been practicing for years. And then he said, it's very important, though, before you start this whole thing, after you have the grease as your foundation, you have to bookend this event. You put the one side of the bookend is the grease with the pork chops, The other side, you put out a nice big aspirin and some B-complex. I'm telling you, man, I couldn't believe it. And He said, make sure you take it before you go down, though, because if you try it the next morning, it won't work, you know. So he would get me all bent up that night, and sometimes I'd forget, and like a three-car wreck on my head. And when you do it right, though, and you take the aspirin just before you go to bed and take the B-complex, you wake up feeling guilty. It was amazing.
There's a life lesson. It
takes the B vitamin out of your system, right?
Ben taught me something that stayed with me all my life. After he left Ellington, he used to go out as a solo, and he couldn't always bring his own rhythm section because the club owners wouldn't pay for it. So one night the rhythm section wasn't making it, and he went ahead anyway, and he made the set, and he said to me, you know, if the rhythm section ain't making it, go for yourself.
You're on your own, huh?
Yeah, right.
Remember the eating contest they used to have?
Oh, yeah.
That was Norman Granz, was it?
Yeah,
George Sween? I think it was Norman, yeah. He had, Benny Carter he is the most elegant man I've ever met in my life and my idol as long as I've been in music. And Benny could eat the New York Times classified section if you had some hot sauce on it. He can really eat. He had a diversionary tactic. He'd put his little finger up, you know. And so when a guy's got a little finger up, it never looks like you're eating too much, you know. They'd have Oscar Peterson, Benny Carter, Ben Webster. I can't remember some of the other guys, but I mean serious black belt eaters, you know. And they'd have them at a table on the stage, you know, maybe like in some of they had early afternoon sessions, and I mean, they could put away some food and everything else, you know. They taught all the young guys, too. They loved to teach the young guys how to do all this. And so you're talking about stocking up your originality. Yeah. It's all of that, you know, the aspirin and the greasy pork chops, it's all of that. Creating that individuality.
You broke a number of barriers, and John Levy, who was the most honest and resourceful manager I've ever come across in the music business, he was also the first mainstream black personal manager. He has a new book out, and he's pointed out that you were the first black executive in a major record company, Mercury, I guess. Right. And that was what, as late as 1961?
Right. That's right, yeah. 61 to about 65.
Yeah. How was that done? What made them finally awake?
Well, what happened, that was total defense desperation. I went to Europe in 1959 with a big band. I was 26, and John Hammond had me meet with Stanley Chase, who was starting up a show, producing a show called Free and Easy, which really was a remake of St. Louis Woman by Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer. And the idea was to have Harold Nicholas star in it. Yeah. He did the original with Pearl Bailey, and have him star in it while we did the out-of-town tryouts in Utrecht, Holland, and all that, and Brussels and Paris. Then we were supposed to meet Sammy Davis in Paris after we really had it together, and come back to Broadway for 2 years. So we had a band. Nat, you remember that band? It was ridiculous, you know, with Phil Woods and Jerome Richardson and just the best musicians, Clark Terry, Jimmy Cleveland, Melba Liston, just an unbelievable band. They had to memorize every note in the show because they had costumes, and this was before No Strings. They had speaking parts and acting parts in it, and it was a wonderful experience until we got to Paris, just before we were supposed to meet Sammy, and the producer came to us on Thursday night and says, "Folks, I'm sorry, we are not going to make it to London. The Algerian crisis was at its height then, and the people were not coming to the Alhambra." In fact, they used to have a little box on the front of the Herald Tribune every day that says, "All swarthy-skinned people stay off the street after 6 o'clock," because they could not tell the difference between Arabic or brothers or whatever. Yeah. And you stayed off the street. You know, I'd go visit my friend sometime. He lived across from a police department. And they used to do spray down, so when you got out of the cab, they didn't hesitate. You'd hear the machine guns cock when you got out, and you just put your hands up to protect yourself.
It's happening now. Go ahead.
Right. What's new, huh? So
how did you get to Mercury and become a man in the front office?
Okay. We got stranded over there. The guaranteed transportation was Saturday, and he told us on Thursday, and I called Willard Alexander, and he says, I'll get back to you momentarily. Momentarily was Monday. And we had a gig for that Saturday night, which I didn't want to blow with the band, for Daniel Philippaki and Frank Tano. Yeah. And so the guaranteed transportation was gone. And I looked up, and there's 30 people, including Charlie Parker's son, Barrett Parker, and dogs and wives, and 18-piece band that I was stuck with in Europe. And I had to figure it out. I had a $4,800 a week payroll. I kept saying, man, the music's going to get us there, but no, it didn't work like that. And we had no managers, no agents or anything else, and so we went from like gypsies, troubadours all over Yugoslavia, 13 cities there. We couldn't get out with the money because it was a communist country. So I'd buy transportation to Germany, whatever. You know all the struggles with bands just roaming around. Nat Cole and Norman Granz gave us the 3-week gig. Folk parks in Sweden, Finland, Spain, everything. And at one point in Turku, Finland, I was so tired because you had to, the guys would catch in a nightclub in Berlin, Woods or Billy Bailey, hey, Q, I need some money, you know, marks and kroner and Swiss francs and da-da-da-da. I'm writing on matchbooks, so I'm trying to relax too. And I got all these papers, and then we finally get to Spain, and pesetas now, I've got to translate all, to convert all of this currency in the middle of the night into one currency and take out the draws that they had and pay them all off. And almost at that point, I was ready to go commit suicide. I really mean it. Yeah. And when you say that, you just want about 20 minutes of peace, you know. That's why it doesn't pay to do something drastic like jumping off of a building, you know. Take some pills so you can change your mind, you know. Have some options. And I finally hocked my publishing company, and every penny I could borrow, it took to get all the people back on the cruiser back home to the United States. And when I got back, we worked for a little while, and I just saw that big band economics, Nat, you saw that personally. Yeah. It did not work anymore, and that was almost the end of the big band era. Yeah. And so Irving Green, who was the president of Mercury, said, well, come over here and A&R. I had a contract with him as an artist. Come over here and be an A&R man. And after a year, he promoted me to vice president. And that was out of necessity. It took me 7 years to pay everything off.
Yeah. You mentioned Melba Liston in your band then, a trombone player, wonderful arranger, etc. There's a discrimination in the business that was happening then, keeps on going. There's a group of women who have been picketing from time to time the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, because Winton has never had a full-time female player, unlike the Repertory Orchestra in Washington. And one of the demonstrations, they had a sign up which said, testosterone is not a musical instrument.
That's great.
Now,
that's beautiful.
Along with Melba, I'm sure you've run across musicians through the years who are female who really could make it.
Absolutely.
But they still have a hard core. What do you...
I never thought twice about it, Nat. You know that, man. I had Patty Bourne in the band from Seattle, who we used to try to sneak out of the house from Seattle when she was like 12 years old, because her mother, she played with the symphony. She was a genius, a child prodigy. And we wanted to come across the street and play at this juke joint at the Washington Social Club, Educational Social Club. That's a joke.
It was an education.
Yes, the proprietor was Reverend Silas Jones, Groves, please. And we couldn't, we had to sneak her out of the house to play jazz with us and blues and everything. And so Patty was in the band, and so was Melba. And nobody, I mean, they were so good, man. I mean, nobody ever thought about that. Yeah. I mean, it never crossed my mind. And I guess at the time I came along, there were women all over the place. Mary McPartland and was the Vibe.
Before that, there was the International Sweethearts of Rhythm.
I knew them, yeah.
And Vi Burnside.
Yeah, Vi Burnside and Clora Bryant, all those ladies. When I was a kid, I used to see them. And it was never a question of can they do it. I knew they could do it. And I never understood that.
Well, maybe next time you see Winton, you can give him a little history.
Okay.
In that set I was talking about, the 3 CDs, the Gillespie tour in 1956, there are interviews on the third set with you, with Dizzy, and a guy, I was mentioning this to Q before, he's a passionate improviser. I've never heard him coast, and that's Phil Woods.
That's right.
An alto player who's, I think, never got his full due. And in the course of the interview, he mentions that one night at Birdland, I guess, he was feeling very sorry for himself. And he was saying, you know, I'm not going to get really anywhere in this music because I'm white. And he says, Dizzy and Art Blakey kidnapped him and brought him to Dizzy's home on the island. And Dizzy lectured him. He said, Bird gave it to everybody, to all races. If you can hear it, you can play it. And that was kind of a turning point for Phil. Yet I remember when Miles Davis hired Bill Evans,
Yeah.
he got a lot of heat from black musicians. Is there still some of that feeling left?
Well, I haven't seen that. We remember the fictional version of Bird that Clint Eastwood did in Charlie Parker's group. He had Red Rodney,
Yeah.
and they get him to go to the South to play with them. He called him Albino Red.
That's right.
Made him a blues singer, put some glasses on, dark shades on. Said he was albino. But I guess the beginning. I guess the pioneers of that must have been, you know, when Teddy Wilson and Hamp went with Benny Goodman's quartet.
Yeah.
When
And Roy Eldridge with Artie Shaw.
right.
Yeah.
And Lena Horne.
Yeah.
You know. Right. Billie Holiday was out with a big band too, wasn't she? Wasn't she out with Artie Shaw for a while? Yeah. But that's when it was strange, you know. And I got a part of that when I was on the road with Hamp's band, where, I mean, Hamp had an integrated band, so and nobody thought about
So
it.
you were about 12 years old then?
I'm not right. 14.
Yeah.
And we'd go to New Orleans, and I just left Seattle, and we'd play New Orleans, all Mississippi, Texas, all of the places. You know what places. I never go back to Georgia. I never go back to Georgia. It was fierce out there, believe me. We played Texas, and all the black bands had white drivers, so we'd be sure to eat in the South. That was part of your equipment, you know. You couldn't eat otherwise if you're traveling. And the union would only let you travel 700 miles a night. And I remember once in Texas, big time, we were really hungry. We got finished the gig about 1:30, and we must have driven through maybe 8 cities. Don't even think about stopping there. And it was got to be dawn, and we hit the next time, I think the 9th city, very affluent looking city, and from the top of a steeple, one of the biggest churches in the city, there was a rope and an effigy of a black dummy off of the church, and you know you're not going to stop in that city. And it was so normal. I mean, it was so common. You know, they'd have a white and colored drinking fountains and seats for parts to sit in the bus station, white and colored. And the dances, they would put row of chairs with seats on both sides that were segregated, and when you really got down there and really in Baum and Chitley Switch, Mississippi and places like that, they'd have general admission $2.50 and white spectators $1.50. They could sit up in the balcony and drink and watch the black people dance, you know. I mean, it was no joke then. The hotels, you got to stay in the hotels. We used to stay in the brown skins. That was the dances, like the Cotton Club dances, who let you stay in the house for $8 and you had one room and one meal. And one night, Jimmy Scott and I stayed in Newport News. We stayed in a funeral parlor with active corpses in the casket. So help me God, asked Jimmy. It was amazing, you know. But that's what it was like. You just had to do what you had to do, and you've seen things change a lot now. Now guys are staying pleased. So.
Yeah, well, Duke Ellington used to travel with the band down south in Pullman cars. He would hire the Pullman cars, and everything would happen in the cars, the food and everything, and people would say, how come that's happening? And Duke would say, well, that's the way presidents travel, right? The person who did a lot to break that down before the social scene more or less changed was Norman Granz.
That's right.
When Norman put Jazz at the Philharmonic on the roll, it was a big gross for promoters. And he refused to play any place where there were segregated audiences.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He and I kind of lined Sinatra up in that group too, because I was shocked that I hadn't been to Vegas before, and we played Vegas the first time when I conducted bassist band for him. It was like 1964. I mean, I said, well, God, 51 to 53, I know what it was like, but Vegas still held on to it. And the first night we went into the Sands, we went over near the slot machines, and all the band gathered. And I remember Keely Smith and her brother was there and everything else, and Jilly. And Frank had 17 dudes that could bite the bricks. They could bite bricks, man, swallow cleaning fluid, I mean, rough dudes. I had a cerebral guy, he was 70 years old, beautiful. He was a martial arts guy. I mean, just pitiful, nobody would mess with me.
Yeah.
And he said to the guys, and I had no idea that Vegas was that bad at the time, he said, if anybody even looks funny at the band, break both of their legs. Frank is not subtle,
Yeah.
He said, break both of them, not one. And it was rough, it was really rough, because just before that, Harry Belafonte, Lena, everybody would play the big rooms, making $17,000 a week. They'd have to eat in the kitchen and sleep across town. I mean, everybody knows that story, though. Yeah.
I always wanted to ask something about Sinatra. I went to a rehearsal once. He had a fairly large orchestra at the Copacabana. People told me he couldn't read music, but he stops the rehearsal at one point and says to the trombone player, "You're playing an E natural. It should be an E flat." Did he have that kind of ear?
Was that?
He said to the trombone player, "You're playing an E natural. It should be an E flat."
Oh, yeah.
He had that kind of ear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're really musical. See, you talked about big bands. What is the importance of big bands, Nat? You have to realize, and this, it took me a long time to really get this. For instance, when we play Vegas with Frank, he'd come in 45 minutes early with his manila folder, all of the songs he's singing, that 14 songs that night, and 45 minutes and a half hour earlier, before he'd start to sing, "Amanda, won't you walk with me? Amanda, won't you walk with me?" Warming up.
Yeah.
Rat Pack, that never happened. They'd get wasted in the steam room, they'd come on the stage the same way, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
And Frank, Jack Andrade used to say, "Man, is he a different person when he works with Basie?" But the truth is, first and foremost, Frank Sinatra is a big band singer. And you have to understand the times, and the Artie Shaw, Duke, and Basie, and Ellen, all of these people, they were the Stones and the Beatles and U2s then. They were the stars. The instrumentalists were the stars.
Yeah.
Big time. And Tommy would play first, and then Ziggy Elman and Buddy Rich would play.
Bunny Berrigan?
Yeah, whoever's the instrumentalist first, and then they throw this bone to the singers. They'd modulate, and Joe Stafford and the Pied Pipers and Sinatra sitting in chairs all night, they'd get up and they'd sing a couple of choruses as a relief element. It's just the opposite.
Yeah.
And that's why Ella, Frank, Peggy Lee, Billy Eckstein, Sarah Vaughan, and all these people had 70-year careers because they had time, a spawning ground, and they had a time to pay their dues and apprenticeships, really, because Frank swears he learned how to breathe from watching Tommy, and
That's right.
Sentimental Over You. And they learned so many things. And all the singers back then, they sang, invented by Louis Armstrong, thank you. He sang like he played, thank God. And Louis invented all of this stuff, or nobody would be doing it. And they all sang like jazz musicians. They sang like jazz instrumentalists. And Sarah and Ella really didn't want to be bothered with lyrics most of the time, that? Some of Ella's best songs is when she forgot the lyrics and didn't have to worry about it.
Also, Sinatra was a very good small combo jazz singer. There are 2 CDs, if you can get them, and I think they're around. One is Sinatra in Paris with a small group.
Yes.
The other is Sinatra in Australia with Red Norvo.
Yes, I
and
remember
this
that.
was jazz.
Yeah, Harry Clee and Emma Richardson.
Yeah,
guys,
right,
yeah.
Now, Phil Wood said something else in that interview that I hadn't heard much before. He talked about what he called the Jewish European harmonic tradition. Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, not all Jewish, there was Cole Porter. And he said that the tradition fed the bebop soul. Dizzy, for example, he said, collated that harmonic sophistication, expanded it, made it deeper, and put rhythm to it. Because Dizzy used to say, I'm a rhythm man. Does Phil have something there? The influence about this European harmonic, you know, in the standards that people like Bird and Dizzy would.
Oh yeah. I mean, please, ornithology, you know, How High the Moon, you know, and all.
Yeah.
All of the songs, the original songs written off of the harmonic structure of the original things. That's what songs like Green Dolphin Street and Body and Soul. My God, Johnny Green must have 900 records on Body and
That's
Soul.
right, yeah.
With just because the great chord structures that it provided. All the Things You Are with Jerome Kern, you know, gave the foundation. You could tell the difference in the attitude of the musicians before and after the modern jazz bebop musicians by the titles alone.
Yeah.
You know, and it was titled like Epistrophe and Ornithology and all that kind of stuff instead of Big Fat Mama, you know. But because the sociology really is clearly all over the music. It really is.
What did you learn from Nadia Boulanger? You studied with her in Paris.
Mm-hmm. I learned a lot of things from her. A lot of things I didn't want to accept at first because most of her students were proper classical students, you know, that were raised right, you know, and went to bed at 7 o'clock and everything else. We woke up at midnight. And we were in nightclubs at 13. So she treated me a little different from the other students, and not in any kind of patronizing, condescending way, but she was curious what was going on. So we had these late sessions out at Fontainebleau, and she'd talk about the necessity in composition to have parameters, and the more definition there are in the parameters, the more freedom you gain. And that didn't make sense to me at first because that doesn't sound like a jazz concept. And she'd say, if you have all freedom, you can do nothing because you don't have any. There's no boundaries, no parameters.
That's Ellington, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And it's very true. And later on, I said that lady was right. You know, she talked about melody. Our melody was king or queen, and how there was no technique or science to melody that comes straight from God's heart and lips, and where just a counterpoint and harmony and all these things have a theory behind it. And she'd take us through, I wanted to get into orchestration really in a serious way. And she was very, very, very perceptive, and so she knew what would challenge me the most, and immediately she said, okay, you want to know about orchestration? You have to do your homework first. And I want you to take the first 25 bars of Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, take the regular score, reduce it to a 6-line sketch. It's very difficult, I mean, if you haven't done it before. Yeah. And bring everything in the orchestra to 6 lines, because that's really what it is, you know, when you really break it down. And once you do that, I said, once you do that, I mean, that's going to take a year and a half. She said, I want you to transpose it up all 12 steps. And by the time you finish that, I trusted her and followed her instructions right to the T. And every time I took it up another half step, I understood what she was trying to teach me. That French horns have amazing sustaining power, but they don't have attack, so you use double stop, cello, and violas on the attack. That's a harp to give it the attack, and the French horns provide the sustain. A million things, how to do overlapping woodwinds and all of those things. Ravel was one of the most amazing orchestrators ever, coming from a Rimsky-Korsakov school, but an amazing orchestrator because it's a virtuoso orchestrator, which in a way kind of ties into Duke.
Right.
Because Duke took the individuality of all the players that came in there, and if they didn't have a place, if Carney would play over the tenor saxes, which is totally unorthodox, and if they didn't have a place to go, Duke would create some new music for them to fit, and everybody had a place. Cootie had a place, Barney Ricard, Juan Tizol, Tricky Sam, it was Ray Nance.
The arrangements for the Ellington band were never first trumpet, second trombone. The names of each musician was on each piece of score.
That's right, and not tell you what part you were playing. That's right.
Yeah.
Britt Woodman.
I understand Nadia Boulanger was interested in jazz, but she said she was, not of the right age to...
Yes, she did. She says, Quincy, I'm too old for that because the problem is it's improvisation, and improvisation means sometimes it's going to be very good and sometimes very, very bad. Because, she turned Gershwin down. Ravel brought Gershwin to her, and she said nope. And she thought that he was a genius in short form, which he certainly was, and didn't want to take a chance on ruining him by the extended form, because Gershwin was very anxious to get to write in long form.
That's interesting.
And she said, asked him finally, she said, how much money did you make? He told her, he said, no, you teach me. And she was an amazing lady. She had a great combination of Russian, very strong lady, and sweet and compassionate, and French and ghetto elegant. She had a lot of ghetto in her too. Yeah. I used to tease her about Stravinsky a lot because she adored Stravinsky. He didn't write one thing without coming to her. Everything he wrote, he brought to her. And she introduced me to him one time, and I almost passed out. And she said, "What's wrong with you? I've never seen you like this before. What happened?" I said, "He's a genius." And it was impressive meeting somebody like this. You don't think they're human. And I met Hindemith one time, too, in Villalobos. And she said, "A genius is a stupid word, and if you must use it, it should be used for someone that attains the highest standards in feeling, sensation, believing, attachment, and knowledge." And that's the first time I'd ever heard that kind of definition before. And because she really believed in what the soul and science of music was about. Right. And that's what she did in 40-part counterpoint, everything. It's an amazing lady.
When I was a kid, I met Johnny Hodges at the stage door, and I was so in awe that I couldn't speak.
The same thing, huh?
Right. Dizzy used to say that he was a student of music all his life. And I remember one thing he told me. He said, music has been out there from the beginning. You can only get a small piece of it. There's so much of it. And of course, you exemplify that. Yeah,
that's like the Michelangelo line. He said, David was already there. I just had to get all of that rest of that rock away, the stone away. Yeah. Coltrane felt the same way.
Now, I'm going back to Phil, because he mentioned that one of the things he misses from the big band days was you'd get on the bus and the old guys would learn, the new guys would learn from the old guys, and there was a real family feeling. How much of that is left?
Well, I think the young people, it's not their fault, it's not anybody's fault, but just the circumstances. I think they're missing a lot, because the social intercourse of music was the best part of talking about music on the band bus, and a jam session after every job we got paid for. I mean, any city in the world, whether it's Brussels or Cleveland, Ohio, or Akron, Ohio, there was a jam session every night. We couldn't wait to go to a jam session. And that interaction with all the musicians, whether it's Sweden, I mean, listen, please, we got off the train in Sweden from Oslo, and we weren't prepared for Europe at all. I thought all the action would be down in Spain and France and Italy. Man, the Swedes wore us out. I couldn't believe it. They were on a baggage cart, Bengt Hallberg, who played with Miles and Stan Getz, killer piano player. He was playing accordion. Åke Persson, who was in my band for a while, major trombones, in the league of JJ and Frank Rosolino. Arne Damnaris. I mean, I couldn't believe Swedes could play like that, And we had no idea of what the European involvement in American jazz was about at all, because we hadn't been over there before. But please. And the folk music was the basis of it. Yeah. And that's what I learned later on. Somebody said in every country, you should check out the food, the music, and the language, and it's all the same thing. And the country can't hide, the nationalistic characteristics can't hide behind that, because that's the truth. Go eat where they eat, and hang out there, and you find out everything about the country. So in Sweden, I met a man named Evert Taube and Sven-Bertil Taube, and they were like the folk archivist legends over there. And they told me about Agramlandishana, which Miles Amstein gets played, dear old Stockholm. And the folklore there, it's the same in Hungary though. Bartok, that music
Bartok used to go out with a recorder.
Yeah. And it's a folk music. It happens in Africa, please, and Brazil.
Yeah.
And that's what Nadia said. Don't get hung up like all these other composers in America come over to try to write the great American symphony. And I said, you've got ore in your own roots, that needs mining so badly, and deal with that, and that was a very helpful insight for me.
Now, somebody once said, there's probably no one in the world who at some point or other has not heard some kind of music you've been associated with, which is a large statement. But it brought me to something you said about how you're able to function and get people to function and be themselves in so many different contexts. You said, most of the time I try to put a musician in a situation where he should be comfortable. But there are times, like the world's greatest guitarist who couldn't read. You put him in a situation with 44 players, and there's a psychological tendency to freak out. I used to have that problem with Basie, you said. I mean, he'd see 7 sharps and head for the bathroom. But it doesn't matter, because there are guys who can read around the corner who couldn't touch Basie with the 2 notes that he could play. So once the musician learns to trust me, learns he can go without the net, then I won't let him fall. We have a great time. That's your secret, so to speak.
Well, I don't think it's a secret. I just think it's the best. The best. It's the best door to truth, because it all boils down to truth. Really, is getting into a place where, especially if you're in a recording scene there, because when you're in a studio. That's why I never wanted to have a recording studio in my home. Yeah. A lot of people have it, As a matter of fact, Harrison Ford used to build all the studios for musicians before he became an actor. He built Sergio Mendes. He was a great carpenter.
Yeah.
But to me, the studio always felt like it was sacred. This is the temple. And when you go there, we have another expression, leave space for God to walk through the room, because that's what has to happen to really make it special. Like when you do Clifford Brown and Helen Merrill, or Clifford Brown and the Swedish All-Stars, there's something that happens. Or Sonny Stitt, whenever the good stuff does happen, when Aretha does Somewhere, and it's like, it's a divine, and it is a divinely guided process. It is, and if you don't believe that, you should get out of music, Get out of your own way, and let that force what come through you, and just be eternal. It's a great place to be, really, because you get some good stuff. And every time I've seen people surrender to that, some fantastic things happen in the studio, because you can sit in there all day and have some very ordinary things happen, or else you can go to let that happen with your preparation naturally, and your imagination, and the state of mind on everybody in the studio. It is a collective. If there's anything better than an individual, miraculous, creative moment, a collective one will blow it away.
Right.
Anytime, if you don't believe it, you listen to a symphony orchestra, and there's 120 musicians, men, women, young, old, and a conductor, and they're not thinking about stock reports or the garden or anything else, or the dinner or anything else. They're thinking about 30-second notes. They asked Stravinsky once, Mr. Stravinsky, when you wrote Apollo, were you thinking about Acropolis? He said, no, I was thinking about violins. And it's true. It's a magic moment when everybody, that many minds and souls and years of experience are traveling down that highway to that tiny degree. It's because it's so precise, really.
There's nothing like it.
It's amazing.
Before we open it up, I want to ask you, briefly maybe, about something that I don't think enough people know about what you do, and that's your foundations. The building homes in South Africa, the gangs in Los Angeles. When did that start? Why did it start?
It started in 1989, when Courtney Ross did a documentary on my life called Listen Up. And it was formed to be there to try to share really. All you can teach somebody is what something you know. It's great to have an idealistic thing, but to wish for the best for them is to teach them what you know and gather a lot of people that know of other things that they can get access to that. Okay, these were the plans for the foundation at that time. Courtney Ross had a big problem because she was, at that time, was trying to she believed in it so strongly, she wanted this documentary to be a feature film. And it's very difficult to get an audience to sit down and watch a documentary that's a feature film. And maybe it belongs on a PBS or another platform. Anyway, her attitude was right on, and her creativity in the book and everything else was 10 years ahead of its time. Listen Up Now, which is run by that lady there, Lisette Duro, and Sean Amos, who's Wally Amos's son. And man, they are on fire, and they're doing what it was meant to do. Last year we went to Mandela invited me to South Africa to co-host with him in the Northwest Provinces, 800 of his HIV kids. All of them had lost their parents. And they were in a parliamentary debate, split in two parts, officiated by people from 16 and 17 years old. And half of the kids had the infection too. Now we brought, on top of that, Lisette and her kitchen cabinet, got amazing ladies that work with her too, decided to, it was a dream of mine for years, is to see what would happen if we took the kids from Compton with us. And so we took 5 at-risk kids, hardcore gangbangers that had been involved in incest and heroin, and 3 generations of uncles killed. We're in the Bloods and Crips, the whole bit, 2 Hispanic and 3 black, 3 females and 2 male. They went with us, and that was interesting, because we figured if we could get them that far away from home and be struck by the Mandela spirit, it would give them a chance at least have the option to change the direction. And they saw these kids in this situation here, discussing their lives and their future, really a life or death situation. Well, afterwards we had a dinner. They're saying, is it condoms, is it abstinence, or whatever it is. These young people trying to figure out how to live till next week, And you're dealing with kids that live in Kleenex boxes for 30 years, for some of the parents, no water, no electricity. And I've been close to Mandela a long time, and we're just trying to figure out what is it you can physically do. So that same year, we promised to do 100 homes with Habitat for Humanity. We had the kids from the ex-gangsters from LA get involved with building the homes with Habitat. And between them meeting Mandela, I'm telling you, one guy, Amari, he got on his knees and he cried like a baby when he shook Mandela's hand, because Mandela's got a very powerful spirit. It's just amazing. And he's the friendliest, most warm guy. Jerry Anzarillo is very close with him. Madiba is one of the most significant people on this planet today. Right. And after 27 years in prison, no bitterness, and he's going about, now he's struggling with 25 million people with AIDS, and as soon as they get out of that, they have to have economic viability. And if they don't have economic viability, if that country goes down with Mandela, the third world is truly finished. Over. And it's teetering on the edge now when people ask me, why aren't you working more at home and so forth? And we will get to that. But this is truly a crisis now. So we have an enormously ambitious project, but we've enlisted some very, very strong people economically, with technology, with education. John Chambers from Cisco is starting an academy over there to train them in high tech, because now we can aim at the thing that we think that they can handle, which is high tech and an agricultural center for there. They invented the culture, so they got that covered. The greatest singers on the planet and musicians. So we've mobilized this, all the forces here with the Deutsche Bank, Crown Prince of Dubai, all of the things it takes. It takes that you have to have that structure to make it work. So the best place to go is Davos. I've been going there for 12 years, because that's a one-stop. Everything's there, from Gates and Dell, Bezos, you name it, Steve Case, Marvin Minsky, who's the co-founder of artificial intelligence. All of them are there. I took Clinton over there one year. Arafat, Mbeki, Tony Blair. So, and then 3,000 CEOs. So you can have meetings there and get all of it done at once, and John Chambers is with us, Craig McCaw, and Ted Forsman, all these people, and puts it together, because this has to be fast, we can't mess around and wait 3 years. It won't wait for 3 years. That's what they're doing, and they're not kidding. And I'll tell you, I just watch them. They wear me out, man. They got papers to sign and do this. And we saw the teachers last night here from the WTO, but I just love it, and it inspires me, because they've got that spirit and they're running with it now. And we go back, we took her board, thank you. Her board, Oprah Winfrey's on the board, Dick Parsons is on the board, De Niro, and Courtney Ross, they all went with us last year. They stayed. Oprah, her busy schedule, got on the plane. She came from Mauritius, and met us there. And Parsons, they stayed 6 days. It was amazing. And when you're there, you can't think about anything else. A lot of people try to pretend that this is a lot of rich people getting together to get rich. These guys got all the money in the world anyway. They don't need any more money. So we're trying to get that money and resources to get down there and help some people that need help. Yeah, they're not asking for handouts or anything. They're just show us how we can do it ourselves, And so by 2003, we need a quota of 53,000 high-tech people that'll be trained. And we hope that'll be the start of a disease that will be contagious throughout all of Africa,
Well, I've always believed that if your roots are in jazz, your roots are in the life force, and you just showed that again. Now, I guess we have the lights up a little, and we'll have some comments, questions, maybe even some denunciations to make it more lively. Now, how do we start? Are there mics up outside on the aisles?
Wow. There's a lot of people here.
Yep, there seem to be. So, let us begin.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Jones.
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Actually, 2 questions, if you will indulge me. One has to do with your scoring for films. If you could talk a little bit about that process of how you score films. And secondly, the hip-hop phenomenon, which I think is in part an outgrowth of 10, 20, maybe 30 years of students growing up, coming through public school systems without the benefit of instruments. And so they've sort of devised their own instrumentation. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. I mean, only in the sort of last part of the 90s here in New York City has there been an effort to introduce instruments back into the public school system. And we have this, this musical, we have all these kids coming out of school developing their own sort of instrumentation, but the fact of the matter is a lot of them don't know how to play instruments. And they're losing a lot of what you gained when you found that piano in that recreation center. So if you could talk just a little bit about that phenomenon, and then would love just to hear a little bit about the process that has resulted in your scoring some of the most magnificent soundtracks.
Well, you're right. Not only they haven't even seen the instruments. I know some people don't know what the instruments look like because they're programmed inside the synthesizer programs and so forth. But you'd be surprised how many people have never seen. And I try to encourage young people all the time. Go out and try to see what a live orchestra really looks like, because there's no place to do it. There's no big bands left.
Yeah.
And outside of some of the institutionalized orchestras we have, like Dave Baker, the Smithsonian, or Winton, or some of these things, North Texas State, Indiana State. Yeah. There's a show in New York I'm in New York, Blast. I think it closed, but we went to see that thing and it blew me away. And they're all students from that that those schools, and some of them are Dave Baker students that really, I'm talking about the best musicians in America. Mancini used to take just a trumpet player and his library and take all the kids from Indiana State on the road with him all the time because they were so good. The scoring process, I'll try to make this real simple. Basically, film scoring is basically about tension and release, and it's emotion lotion. It's you're painting the psyche of a subconscious of an audience. So, and the way you can do it two ways. In representative scoring, that's where you hear what you see. Run up the step, and kiss. Yeah, you've seen those, and that's representative. And I'm not knocking that because there have been some incredible composers, and we all have to learn how to do that because it comes from Wagnerian leitmotif and Eastern European composition. I mean, that was the first scoring for movies, and that seemed to work well because it really is emotion lotion. It soups up emotional scenes and pulls you further into the picture. Then there's another way to go, which is a more abstract way, but I think just as effective, is when you take the music over here and let the visual have its own personality, and you don't try to match the dramatic qualities with music, and you go maybe opposite, like Fellini does. For instance, there's a very big playful scene in a carnival, etc., behind the bushes where it's very dark and sinister. Representative score would have low cello and basses and bass clarinets and all that. That you hear the sinister things. Fellini would have a Nina Rota do with a calliope or so forth, and a woman's getting strangled, and that's it's very powerful though, because it gives you a chasm in the middle where you can the audience can get their emotion involved. Anyway, a composer gets called, whoever it is, Johnny Williams or whoever, and they usually give them about 3 months. The first thing they do is sit down in a dark room with a director whose vision is supposed to be the chief of all the vision. Then a musical director from the studio, and maybe a producer, and a music editor who takes notes, like minutes, of what's happening, because what you're doing is the spotting of the film. And that means where does it start and where does it stop? It's that simple. And every start and stop, the editor starts with this 00 and does 1 minute and 40 up to 8 or 12 minutes, whatever it is. And they break it down into a series of cues. Then they talk about the character of what the director wants. And the smart directors don't try to talk music. The best for them to talk emotions, and the composer will translate that into music, hopefully, if he has the chops. And he goes off in his 3 months, and he tries out themes on like a suit, with fabric and so forth, and that's a good idea to see what the director's vision is about, because it's not just what you think, and you're dealing with a preconceived amount of time. It's not going to change because you wrote a little extra music. That's what it is, Interior, close up on a face, to exterior, thousands of people. You can't have the same music playing. And so you've got to go with, and the synchronization is the big thing. And then you go in, and you go into a scoring session after everybody agrees you're on the right track. And you're there with anywhere from 3 musicians to 125. And you put earphones on, you have a huge clock stopwatch. They take each piece of the film that you're going to score separately, and they have, with the grease pencils, they draw a 2-second line or 3-second line across, so that it gradually moves across the film like that, and they punch. There are 2 punches in there, so it's a preparatory line that says like that, and the conductor's sounds like that, and he knows by the time it gets to this side, it's time for downbeat. Bang! It hits on the punch. That's to assure that you have the synchronization. And the other way they do it is with a click track. So where everything's figured out by a certain tempo, and they give you a click track, tuck, 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 terrible sound in your ear while you're scoring, but it's a very safe way to make sure you catch everything, especially in faster music, chases or cartoons. And from there on in, the composer prays, because the rough part is the people that are paying these lots of money for these lots of musicians and time and an expensive composer, for the most part, they don't have any idea what's going to happen in the scoring session. So you talk about Russian roulette, you know. And I've seen situations where this is the most drastic. Most pros know how to make it work, and they can change it on the stage. The director said it's too melodramatic or it's not. They can change it on the stage. But I remember a situation with Hitchcock. We was at the session. He'd worked with Bernie Herrmann for years and years and years. Bernie Herrmann's one of the greatest that ever did it. He has a very distinctive style. So Hitchcock on Torn Curtain says, I want a contemporary score on this. And Bernie's a rough guy. Contemporary in my butt. You know, I don't want to hear about that, you know. So he did it the same way with the 8 French horns and a big orchestra. And 10 minutes into the session, Hitchcock, who always showed up in the front row, very quiet, in black suit, white shirt, and black tie, still not a peep, not one poker face. He always was like that. If he was joyful, he was like that. So he sits there, and he says, Bobby Helfer was the contractor. It says, cancel the session and go hire John Addison to do the next score. And that's what we all feared, you know. And man, it has happened to a lot of people. They don't even give you a second chance. And many times the director leads you down the wrong way. And I won't call any names here. A very big picture with Steve McQueen. Director loved a friend of mine's score. Perfect, man. I love it. And he was even up there conducting the score with the composer and everything else. They get in the dubbing room. See, that's the moment of truth, because when you're doing it there, it's silent, and there's nothing there but just images and the music, so anything works. Get in the dubbing room, and there's these trucks screaming around and machine gun fire and brakes and everything else and loud dialogue, and the mixture, the music has to sit right in that with screeching brakes and trucks and gunfights and screaming, and it has to make it all work dramatically. And sometimes it's too much. And in this case, he said, call Johnny Williams. Out. And they won't even give you a second chance, because any composer can do it 20 ways, you know. But that's the way it works. And most of the pros have learned how to get it right the first time. I'm not the hip-hop.
You were the first, I think, to use a synthesizer for a theme for a movie. Mm-hmm. Can this electronic stuff go too far? I've been hearing about some composers, jazz composers, using improvising computers. What happens to the soul?
No, it disappears. And there were big problems with that. I think I used the first synthesizer in Ironside. And, the thing is, what happens is if you're not an orchestrator, you try to replicate the orchestra. Replace the orchestra with synthesizer. The synthesizer is just another word in your vocabulary. It's like the string section, the brass section. You can't replace strings. You add it to that. You know, it's an addition. And if you use it like that, it can happen. I remember Robert Moog was asked me when after I used it in Ironside, he says, why don't more black musicians use a synthesizer? I said, because it's one electrical signal. It can be sculpted. It's a sine wave, a sawtooth wave, or whatever. That's a characteristic of it. But, man, it does not bend. And if it doesn't bend, it can't get funky, you know? And nobody's going to play it if it can't get funky. And so as soon as they put a pitch bender on it so that it could bend, Stevie Wonder had 4 Grammy albums with the synthesizer, but he couldn't have done that with the initial sound that the synthesizer make. And that I agree. There's nothing as disgusting as a synthesizer out of control and trying to overtake something. It's just another way. It's an alternative. It's not the end result.
Jimmy Rolls, the master pianist and accompanist, was once asked if he had one wish, and you know this one, in life, what would he do? He'd burn down the Fender bass factory. Is that too much of a Luddite?
Yeah, no, but I don't agree with the Fender bass, because the Fender bass changed the music a lot. it added a whole other thing. There wouldn't have been Motown, or I know probably people say great, or rock and roll if it hadn't been for the film effects.
Okay. Now,
I know.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Sorry.
Among your many successes, one has been the formation of Quest Records. It's spawned artists such as Saida Garrett, New Order, many others. Can you talk about that and your philosophy behind Quest Records?
Well, the philosophy behind Quest was to deal with a boutique label, really. But what I didn't anticipate was the enormous grasp you have to have 24/7 over all the elements involved, including my unit, which is almost like an autonomous unit that's plugged into a mothership, that may consider every now and then to make your record a top priority. And that's the problem. Because they swear to you that they will support you and everything else. And Mo Austin, who's a really good friend of mine, we used to have this argument all the time. You're not with us. Oh, yes, we are. Yes, we are. They'd bring all the guys in. They'd say all the right things. And they'd have webbed feet and they'd quack, but they were not ducks, They would just lay us out to dry, hang us out to dry, And then when Mo left and went with DreamWorks, he said, Q, you were right. He said, all the motherships are like that, but I couldn't say that when I was there. And so it's a very rough, haul, because you have to music is very subjective, and you are subjected to everybody in there, from the vice president to the attorneys of the mothership, to all the A&R department who might just like punk music, and a lot of them do, Don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about Kevin Campbell. They know New Order, but they don't know about James Ingram or Tevin Campbell, or I've got John Clayton on my label. We have some great people, Clark Terry. They don't know what you're talking about unless you don't have control of it. But bottom line is, right now, the record business is in a total state of chaos now. And Napster and MP3, man, it put it down front. Maybe that's the way it should be, because everything's going to have to change a lot before we go on in records.
Musicians still ought to be able to get royalties, right?
Yeah. These guys were giving it away. Everybody's going to go for free music, shareware or not, Yeah. But I think by the time broadband gets here and silicone and microchips, the quarter's almost run out on that anyway. His days are numbered, man. Sitting there 40% complete and all that stuff. How boring is that, Almost ready to put the graphics up now. Nonsense. When they have nanotechnology, they say at MIT it's going to be 1 billion times faster. Then it'll solve a lot of problems.
Yes.
Oh, we're on. Okay. Well, firstly, I just like to thank you for actually coming here to the 92nd Street Y and giving us all an opportunity. It's a great honor to be in your audience. I have a few remarks. One about sneaking into concert halls. Now, if anyone needs to sneak into Avery Fisher Hall, I know how to get multitudes of people in there for free. So it's something we learned at Manhattan School of Music, but sorry. Nat, I like your socks.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mr. Jones, if you care to comment on like media as far as television and film. Is that something you're interested in commenting on this evening?
I'm sorry, Nat, I've been in the studio so long, man.
You're going to. I was just curious if you're interested in commenting on film or television this evening at all, or do you rather just deal with music?
I didn't quite get it either. Could you do it one more time?
All right. I know most of the evening we've spoken about music, jazz, etc. I know you are involved heavily in film and television. I was just wanted to know if you're interested in commenting on it, because I do have a question in regards to that. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, this is not your fault, honey. This is from being in the studio 50 years.
Okay, all right. No, I just, as far as you were speaking about the state of being a musician 30, 40 years ago, the colored, whites, etc., I was kind of shocked when Spike Lee did his Summer of Sam, and that he was getting so much sort of flack or just press about, oh my God, here's a black guy doing a white movie. I just kind of found it startling. Maybe it's because I'm from a music background, and either you play well or you don't. It's that simple. And I'm actually experiencing something similar. Hey, everyone's leaving. Hey. All right, okay, hang on. I've since subsequently moved into writing.
Can you just make it one short,
Okay.
one short question, please?
I have been I have a literary agent. I have something I've written. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Hello, thank you. Mr. Jones, it's an honor to be in your presence, you too, Mr. Hentoff. Quincy, if I may, how would you advise an up-and-coming artist to maintain artistic control or artistic integrity these days? You were talking about the music industry and how it's in chaos. Who has the control in terms of what actually gets out? I mean, radio stations, back in the 70s, you would hear everything on the same station. Now everything's so broken up. I mean, is there some way we can, get some more variety on the air? I think that's the main question.
Well, I agree with you there. I mean,
Yeah.
you're jumping into some deep stuff now because, man, you talk about formats and demographics and all that stuff. And I really feel for you, man. I understand because basically, my attitude is you just keep getting better and better, and the better you get. Here's a good example. A person comes to me with one song. I say, how long have you been running around with this song? They say, 2 years. I say, go back home, write 200 songs, man, and let somebody else talk about the song and sell it for you. And you write 200 songs, you'll be better. I'm not talking about you right now, but I mean just in general. And you will be better because you have to learn, you have to learn your craft, you have to find your core skill, you have to nurture it and build on top of that, until technology and everything else gets ready for you. They're not ready for it, man. Believe me, all of them are in trouble, man, whether it's Clear Channel or MS, or all of them are out there trying to find their way. They're wimping their way around the world trying to figure it out with a satellite or this and that, and they're lost. I'm telling you, I know them. And all I'm telling you, you stay with what your soul's doing, man, and get better and better, know more about what you're doing, and you're going to win.
Yeah,
Thank you.
One of the big problems is what happened to radio. I started in radio years ago. I was in radio a long time, and most of us then could pick our own whatever we wanted to play. We had independent stations. They were involuntarily independent. They wanted to be part of the network. But once you had these Clear Channel and all these corporation swallowing up other corporations, everybody has a play sheet. And you could just as well, as Lenny Bruce would say, send your suit. There's no individual taste anymore. Sometimes you get it on college radio stations like WQCR. And if there's a station around like WFUV here, it ought to be supported. So in terms of getting it possible for people who want quality music to create as well as to listen to, it doesn't sound like much, but support the few places where they do that and ignore the ones with the big ratings.
And he's right. We're dealing with a thing throughout the entertainment business where conglomerates are telling everybody what they need to hear. It's true. They send playlists out. You don't have the individuality to determine that anymore. Sometimes a program director does, but between that and payola, man, it's hard to get in between it. Believe me. And if I had any one serious, passionate quest that matches what Listen Up is about, and that I just ran straight head on into this in the book. Nat, I'm sorry to talk to so much, man. But I feel it so strongly, and I talked to some people at WHUR today. All over the planet, I don't care if it's Estonia, I've been around the world 900 times, Yugoslavia, Argentina, Rio, Taiwan, Asia, wherever. The entire planet decided, especially the youth, that it's not kabuki, it's not German lieder, it's not bagpipes and everything else. It is Black American music. It's American music. Is their Esperanto everywhere. I don't care where you go. And I think what's ironic is they really know the value of this music for a long time. The oldest jazz magazine in the world was was from Sweden with Harry Nicolaus and the Orchestra Journalin, and all the guys, Schuppan RCA and Duditsky and Kurt Moore and Charles Delane in Japan. They know every time Charlie Parker puts some Dexedrine in Rubber-Legged Williams coffee. They know everything about our music. And it's just true that every story they know about. And you know what? We know the least amount about it. I'm not talking about the people in this room necessarily, but the people that our children, our youth do not know. The school systems, when they cut off the funds get cut off with popular music. This is the birth ground, that's the soul of this country, is the all of ethnic contributions, to what the music's about, and that power, that African mode and all that other stuff on top of it. And until I die, I'm going to try to find a way to get to talk to the people that's in the White House or whatever, to get a minister of culture or whatever they have to do, and get into school systems. I'm really serious. And get off their butts, and teach the youth. I'll tell you, a lot of problems with self-esteem, especially in at-risk neighborhoods and urban situations, would give kids amazing self-esteem if they really knew what was going on with that music, all the way back from gospel music, to African music, the merger in New Orleans, what happened between Africans and mulattoes, to bring the jazz thing and the rhythm and blues of the Delta. All of that, and understand what your music is about, because I swear to God, in 50 years from now, Ellington's and Basie and Charlie Parker and Louis Armstrong and Coltrane and all these other things straight down the line of Stevie Wonders are going to be the Beethovens and Bachs and Browns of our country, I'm telling you. And we don't get it. We really don't get it, And I'm talking about little young brothers too, and all the hip-hop brothers are my friends, Puffy and Andre and Russell and everything else. But there is a lot going on, and I respect the rappers to no end. I work with 3 dozen rappers. They deal with LL Cool said to me when he was 15, what do the singers and musicians think about us? That was 85. Then I got it. It's a third entity, but it's another black baby in the music business, And it's very valid, because you're in the studio with a rapper, he listens to the tape 2 times, he writes it in 5 minutes and records it in 2 takes. Sometimes it's like Bird. I'm telling you, they're so creative, man. And so content is a big problem, I will agree. We got to get out of mind pollution and get into mind solutions. The rappers could revolutionize education. Tomorrow they could revolutionize education. Every kid would be listening. And so it's a question, that's why I'm always fighting to bring all of these families together musically and spread it and make these jockeys, and the black radio too, play all of our music, not just this one little myopic flavor of the week stuff, because all of it's good. I like all of it, so I think everybody should be exposed to all of it and love it and eat it. It's good. And it'll make you feel good.
Before the last question, I want to give you a glimmer of hope. There's part of the music that in Sarasota, Florida, all the 5th grade kids in the public schools are learning American history intertwined with jazz. Biographies of musicians, recordings, musicians come in and answer questions, etc. And one of the 5th grade have their own band now. And this happened because of a woman named Nancy White, who's now in her 80s. She grew up in Harlem, used to go to the Savoy Ballroom, listen to Chick Webb, and she taught music down there. And she said she used to bring musicians into the schools and say, but that's not enough. This is all part of American history. And she said, I don't want it on just Black History Week. I want it for everybody.
Right, that's right.
So, last question.
He was first.
Okay.
First of all, congratulations to you on the documentary, which we haven't really talked about. I think I experienced something today for you that was very wonderful. There were some young brothers in Queens out in Jamaica who were sitting around in a barbershop, and they were talking about how much they had learned, involved with, and some ideas that you had, I know, about setting up an infrastructure with that. And then my overall question is just one concerning Thriller. We haven't talked a lot about Thriller, but it seems that when I read your book, a lot of what you did in your career ultimately led to what we saw happen with the explosion of Thriller. And there's a wonderful piece about Count Basie and what he said to you about that. I'd like you to share that if you would.
You want me to address the television thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. The television situation, especially the NUS situation, is caught up in the same gridlock of everything else, of I think we're going on, and this can be good news if we treat it right. You know, but you're in the process of us coming face to face with enormous potential for platforms for exposure and so forth. You know, Coleman Hawkins recorded Body and Soul in 1939, 39 now,
Yeah.
something like that, and it lasted until it was a hit record on Body and Soul till 1953. Because it took that long for me to say, hey, did you hear Coleman Hawkins sing on that? Did you hear that? Da, da, da. Just word of mouth and radio, whatever it took. Today, it's a nanosecond because you've got satellite, and the communications have a very powerful effect on the world, as you see. The Berlin Wall didn't come down because of the KGB or the CIA and everything else. It came down because of communications and seeing these people in jeans and these people doing this and the music and everything else. And everybody's trying to figure that out now. The people overseas are fighting globalization, which is right, because you don't want it to be homogenized nationally. Make a long story short, the television station is still trying to find its parents, you know what I mean, and its home, and its method of transmission of where exactly does it sit. You know, it's not everything now is moving so fast, man. I cannot tell you how fast, you know. And we're in a crisis situation here now economically. It's like we bought up all the pumpkins and farms and turkey farms, and they call off Halloween. And so we're trying to figure out just how to get it to the mainland, the station. I mean, it's enormous effort to get a channel going, man. Please, it is. You have no idea. Look. Or they're scuffling with Liz Claiborne and Oprah over there with oxygen. You know, and Oprah is probably the most powerful person in communications. But it takes time, and you have to discover. It's like a rhythm section basses band. They have to play together for a while, man, to find those pockets together. And I'm not saying this in any kind of negative way. I'm just saying, follow your bliss, follow your soul, and let that lead us to some of the solutions, you know. All this technical and mechanical stuff, because that's what's going to lead it. You can't roll out technology, roll out soul and feelings and ideas. And so we're trying to figure that out, and it's like a chicken and egg situation. It's really difficult. I'm sorry I know anything about it.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.